Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Today, are there any questions before we start? Okay, there's just one thing I would like you all to know. If you find that you are missing any lectures, you can always go on YouTube because I have most of my lectures posted on YouTube. So all what you need to do is just put my name in, Nasser Duella. Right here, you have it right there, Nasser Duella. If you put that on YouTube, then you will see a bunch of lectures on international economics, and they are all titled. Some are titled the Ricardo model, some are titled like the HO model, tariffs, um, dynamic competitive advantage, etc. So if you feel that you're missing any lectures, go to YouTube and you will be able to get those lectures from YouTube if you're missing any. Because sometimes, I'm having a hard time with Zoom, basically with the links that they send me. And sometimes I find it extremely difficult to get those things in. So that's why sometimes you don't see me sending you links, for the simple reason because I usually try them myself. And when I receive those links and I try them, if they work, I'll post them to you. But if they don't, then obviously there is no reason for posting it to you. And that's the main reason why sometimes you see that you're missing some lectures. So I decided, to do it on YouTube, and the best way to do it is from my Dropbox. Um, that's the only way I can do it. Well, anyway, I'm hoping that this would solve the problem for now. But whenever I can, I will try to post the links on Zoom for you so that you can obviously access those lectures as you were able to before. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, good. So anyone who came in late, or you can pass the words to anyone, or just put it down on chat or whatever, that if anyone is missing any lectures, you can always go on YouTube, just put my name in, and there you have it. Okay, today what we want to do is we want to look at tariffs and the effective rate of protection. And you can see that always whenever I see that there is a concept or a problem that I need to have it explained a little bit more, usually, I take some notes from the book that I have, and I try to share those notes with you as briefly as possible, of course, with some examples. And, I end up posting this notes on Titanium. Again, you will see this later this afternoon posted on Titanium for you, so you can actually go through it very slowly, and it has an excellent explanation of what the effective rate of protection is. Okay, so let's look at what the effective rate of protection is. When we're talking about tariffs, there is a nominal rate of protection and there is an effective rate of protection. In other words, whenever a government imposes a tariff on imported goods, there will always be a nominal rate of protection as well as an effective rate of protection. There is a huge difference between the two. And today, we will look at that difference, why they are different, and how do we interpret the effective rate of protection. So from here, what I have said is that one of the ironies of tariff protection is that often it tells you a lot what it is not saying. In other words, it is not what it seems. In fact, if you look at the amount of protection given to any product, you will see that that kind of protection does not only depend on the tariff rate that is placed on the final product, but it also depends on the tariffs imposed on all the imported immediate inputs that are required to produce the final product. For example, let's assume that the US imposes a 10% tariff on all imported laptops. So this 10% that you see right here, which the US has imposed on imported laptops, is known as the nominal rate of protection. That's what we mean by the nominal rate of protection, which is simply the 10% tariff placed on the final product. Now also assume that the laptop sells for $1,000 and that the US firm will have to purchase $400 worth of components from Japan. I'm just giving you an example here. Let's say that the laptop industry in the US would have to purchase $400 worth of intermediate components that are needed to produce laptops. And this could be microprocessors, it could be memory chips, it could be hard disk drives. I mean, there's so many things that go into producing a laptop. And here we're just taking an example and we're saying, let's assume that the US manufacturing firm requires $400 out of that $1,000 that it charges. $400 would have to go to import intermediate inputs or components from Japan. So given this information, given that the US will impose 10% tariff on laptops, and that laptops sell for $1,000, and that US firms require $400 worth of imported components, given this information, find the nominal rate of protection and the effective rate of protection for the US laptop industry. So this is basically what we are given, and we are asked to find the NRP and the ERP. Also, taking it one step further, let's assume that the US will also impose a 20% tariff on all the imported components. So the US will continue to impose 10% on the final product, as well as 20% tariff on the imported components. If this is the case, then what do you think the effective rate of protection for the laptop industry in the US will be? These are the questions that hopefully we try to give answers to in this lecture. So let's move forward. First, let us define a few terms. We have already defined what the nominal rate of protection is, which we said it's simply the tariff rate that's imposed on the final product. So by now, everyone should know what the nominal rate of protection is. So if the US happens to impose a 10% tariff, the nominal rate of protection is 10%. If the US happens to impose a 25% tariff on laptops, again, the nominal rate of protection will be 25%, and so on. So from now on, you should be able to know what the nominal rate of protection is. Very clear to everyone what the nominal rate is?
Yes.
Okay. Now we go to the effective rate of protection. Okay, what is the effective rate? Is it different from the nominal? And if so, why? Okay, the effective rate of protection is simply defined as the tariff that takes into account the nominal tariff on the final product as well as the tariff on all the imported components. That is known as the effective rate of protection. Now, some of you may tell me, well, suppose we only have tariff on the final product and 0 on the imported components. Does that mean we're going to come up with a different effective rate of protection than the nominal rate of protection? And the answer is yes. So even if the country only imposes a tariff on the final product, you will always have an effective rate of protection that will be different from the nominal rate of protection. And we will see this in just a minute through an example. So again, the effective rate of protection is simply defined as the tariff that takes into account both the nominal tariff on the final product as well as the tariff on all the imported components. Now, the effective rate of protection is related to a very important concept, which is value added. Value added. Remember this concept, very important. Now, what is value added? There are two types of value added. That's why I have value added right here, and I have value added star right there. And I will explain the difference between them. But first, let us start with the regular value added, no stars, just value added. What value added means here is simply the difference between the price of the good and the cost of all the intermediate goods used in its production. So it's the difference between the price of the good and the cost of all the imported components. And this is all under free trade. In other words, we don't have any tariffs here. So the normal or regular value added, this one right here, this value added, simply refers to the difference between the price of the good and the cost of all the imported components under free trade. So you don't have to worry about tariffs. You don't have to include any tariffs because we're talking about free trade here. So let's go to our example here. If I want to find the value added of laptops here, what would be the value added equal to?
Would it be 600?
Very good, 600, which is simply the price of the laptop, which is 1,000, minus the cost of all the imported inputs, which is 400. So 1,000 minus 400 will give me a value added of $600. What does that mean? That simply means that the US manufacturer is adding $600 of value to the laptop. That's all what the manufacturer is adding. That's all what the US manufacturer is responsible for. Just 600. The other 400 is coming from somewhere else. Does this make sense to everyone? If anyone has any questions, please ask them now. Okay, I take it it's just clear to everyone. Okay, so now we know what value added is. We know how to compute value added. Everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, the next step is let's go to VA star and let's see what VA star means here. VA star is simply defined as the value added when tariffs are imposed on either the final product or the intermediate components or both. So that's what the VA star is. It's the value added that results after tariffs are taken into consideration. Remember, VA does not deal with tariffs. VA star is the one that deals with tariffs. So from here, and we will use an example, as I said, to show exactly how we go about calculating the VA and the VA star. Excuse me.
Professor, can you repeat that VA star definition one more time, please?
Yeah, the VA star is simply defined as the value added when all tariffs are taken into consideration. When you're including all tariffs. And we will see what this means in just a minute. So the effective rate of protection can be defined as VA star minus VA divided by VA. That's what the effective rate of protection is. It's defined by this simple equation right here. Now, according to the above problem that we have already calculated VA, and we said that VA was simply equal to $1,000, which is the price of the laptop, minus $400, which is the cost of the imported inputs. This will give me a domestic value added of $600. Now, with a 10% tariff on the final product only, because the first question asks us to find the effective rate of protection when there was only a 10% tariff on the final product, 0 tariff on the intermediate inputs. So let us find the effective rate of protection when there is only a 10% tariff on the final product. Okay, how do we do that? Very simple. Value added star will be equal to the price of the product now will not be $1,000 anymore, but it will be $1,000 plus the tariff. What is the tariff? The tariff is 10%. So if I multiply 1,000 by 1.10, how much am I gonna get? Come on, anyone.
1,100.
What's that?
1,100.
1,100, that's exactly correct. So now the new price of the laptop is 1,100. 1,000 plus 100 tariffs that we have to pay. Because we have to pay a tariff of 10%. 10% of 1,000 is 100. So now instead of paying 1,000, I end up paying 1,100. Okay, minus what? Minus the cost of the inputs. What are the cost of the inputs?
400.
400.
400. So that would give me a VA star equal to what?
700.
700. Very good. So this is how I found my VA star. Nothing complicated. Very easy. Very simple. Okay. So now I know my VA star and I know my VA. So what do I do with this information? I go back to the equation and I would plug those numbers in. So when I plug those numbers in, I'm gonna get my effective rate of protection. which is 700 minus 600 divided by 600 is exactly equal to 17%. So this is the effective rate of protection. So compare this effective rate of protection with the nominal rate of protection, which is this one right here. Is there a difference between them?
Wait, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
I said compare the effective rate of protection with the nominal rate of protection.
There's a 7% difference.
Very good. There is a 7% difference. So now, in fact, laptop producers in the US are getting 7% over and above the nominal rate of protection. They're getting protected to the tune of 17%, whereas the nominal rate of protection is telling me that laptop manufacturers are only going to get a 10%. So again, going back to what we were saying from the beginning, let's go back to it. Just as a reminder to some who probably have forgotten, what did we say right here? Read this sentence. One of the ironies of tariff protection is that often it is not what it seems. So the 10% protection really doesn't mean much, because the effective rate of protection is telling us that the industry is going to get a 17% rather than 10%. That's why it's very important to calculate what the effective rate of protection is. The nominal rate of protection tells us very little. The actual rate of protection is this one right here, which is the effective rate. Okay, let's move forward now. So
What do you mean by protection?
That means you're protecting your domestic industry from foreign competition. That's what protection means.
At a 17% rate.
Exactly, at the 17% rate. So now, what does that mean? That simply means that the domestic industry in the US of laptop have a 17% of the total value of laptops, which is $8,000 to work with. And they can use that extra 17% maybe to invest more in R&D, maybe to increase salaries of workers, maybe to bring in new capital equipment, whatever the case may be. But that 17% is very crucial to domestic.
What's the other 83% on that?
Well, the 83, of course, is the cost of doing business, the cost of producing, the cost of paying for components, the cost of everything else, basically.
Okay.
So you have that 17% window that you can work with before you come even with foreign producers. Because when you reach that 17% plateau, that means you are dead even with foreign producers. Once you have spent all that 17%, then you are right there. The playing field is leveled with foreign producers. So again, it does give some maneuvering room, if you will, for domestic producers to try and make their production methods better, more competitive, to try and invest in R&D, to try and give, I don't know, bonus to hardworking workers or whatever the case may be. In other words, you know, there's so many things that you can do with that money, basically. Okay, now let's see what happens when the government imposes a 10% tariff on the final product and also a 20% tariff on imported components. How will this affect the effective rate of protection? Okay, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to find out what the value added star is, VA star. How are we going to do that? Well, we know the price of the product is $1,000, and we know that the government is imposing 10%. So we know that the final price is going to be $1,100. Everyone agrees so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we know the final price is going to be $1,100. Now let's look at the cost of the components. They're going to cost me $400, but I'm going to pay 20%. So what would be the total cost of my components now?
1,200.
What's that?
12. Oh, you're doing it on your on the cost, you mean?
Yeah, the cost of the component. What's the cost of the component?
400 and
480.
Very good, 480, which is 400 times 1.2. That's 480 right there. So you have 1,100 minus 480, which is what? Which is 620, correct? If my math is correct, should be 620.
Yeah, 620.
620. So that's my VD. I'm sorry, that's my VA star, which is the price of the product after the tariff minus the cost of the component after the tariff. This will give me an amount of $620. So these things right here, within these parentheses, you see I have these parentheses here. This really reflects VD star. So when you get those notes, you can probably put VD star right here, just to show that this whole bracket of the equation refers to VA star, value added star. So we said it's 620. So now I'm going to go back to my equation, and I know that ERP is equal to VA star minus VA over VA. VA always stays the same. I'm not going to change my VA because by definition, that's what VA is. It does not include any tariffs. So my VA will always stay the same. So I'm going to have 620 minus 600 divided by 600. And this will be equal to 3%. This would be my effective rate of protection when the government is imposing a tariff on the final product as well as a tariff on all the imported components. So now you can see that obviously the effective rate of protection has fallen tremendously, from 17% to about 3%. So all the protection I'm giving now to the producers of laptops in the US is only 3%. And that's why it's very important to always compute the effective rate of protection, because we really want to know exactly how much protection are we affording to the domestic producers. Now, it is very possible for the effective rate of protection to turn negative. As I said right here in my notes, the effective rate of protection can also turn negative, which means that local producers are now more exposed to foreign competition than if there were no tariffs at all. And this negative ERP is not uncommon. It does exist in the real world. Why do you think it exists? Why do you think it's not uncommon? The reason is simply because tariffs are usually enacted in pretty much a piecemeal fashion, step by step, if you will, by the different agencies in the Commerce Department. And these tariff enactments are done over long periods of time. So it's very, very difficult to lose coordination between the different agencies. Sometimes certain agencies have no idea what the other agencies are doing, because there are so many tariffs that we're talking about here. And usually you have certain agencies in charge of levying certain tariffs. Other agencies are in charge of levying other tariffs. So all of these things, obviously, I mean, the whole process is extremely complicated. And as a result, it is very easy to lose focus. It is very easy to see that there is some sort of a lack of coordination between the different agencies. And as a result, it is very possible for the effective rate of protection to enter into negative territories.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
What is the difference between the final tariff, final product tariff, and the imported tariff, and where is that money going to?
Okay, what's the difference between the imported tariff and the final tariff, you said?
Yeah, so you're saying there's a tariff on imported products, and then there's also a tariff on selling the product, it sounds like. What is the difference between the two? I mean, is it both government implemented or?
Yeah, they are implemented. There is one tariff, basically. The tariff is either on the final product or a tariff on the components. Okay? In other words, there is a tariff on imported goods. Now, some imported goods have tariffs on them, some imported goods don't.
Okay, I see. I think I see what you're. I
Yeah.
see what you're saying now. So when the government implements a tariff, they can say we're putting a tariff on computers, but that doesn't mean the tariff is on any of the components inside.
Exactly. When the government says we're imposing a 10% tariff on computers, that means they are imposing it simply on the final product. Now, there comes another agency within the Commerce Department who are obviously responsible for trade policy, and they would say, okay, we're going to impose a 15% tariff on a certain component. It may be, let's say, on memory chips. Another agency may say, okay, we're going to be imposing a 3% tariff on hard disk drives. Okay? So that's what I said. I mean, there are so many tariffs going on here on imported products that's very difficult to get some sort of a decent coordination taking place between the different agencies. Usually at many times, often, a lot of these agencies have no idea what the other agency is doing.
Where is that money going to then?
No, the tariffs go to the government.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then usually don't businesses pass the tariff on? So like that 20% that went into the computer parts, wouldn't that go into the final product then as it got passed along onto the person purchasing it, the consumer?
Oh, you're making a huge misinterpretation here. Here we're
Okay.
talking about, what we're talking about here is that the domestic producers are really not imposing any tariffs. The tariff is being imposed on the foreign producers, not on the domestic producer.
Oh, okay. I think I see.
Okay? Now, the domestic producer is going to benefit from that. Why? Because now, instead of charging $1,000, this domestic producer is going to say, well, you know what? I can actually up my price to $1,100 because that's what foreign laptops are selling for. So why shouldn't I put my price to $1,100? Now, it's very possible that this may be the case, at least in theory. That's what we're saying in theory. Now, in practice, it is very possible for some companies to charge maybe 1,100. Others will, just leave their price as is. Others will probably charge 1,150. And you still have some other companies that may charge 1,200 or 1,300. We're simply living in a world of imperfect competition. We're living in a world of product differentiation. So different companies can actually charge different prices. But obviously, to make things simple here in theory, we're trying to show that, hey, suppose everyone is charging the same price here after the tariff, which is $1,100. What's going to happen? Okay? But in reality, that different companies may actually charge different prices. But this is not what we're trying to investigate here. This is something that a different economic model would deal with. In our case, what we want to deal with is how will a 15 or 10 or 20% tariff on the final product affect the effective rate of protection? How will a 10 or 20% tariff on foreign components will affect the effective rate of protection? That's all we need to answer. This is the issue we want to address, basically. Okay, does this make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, very good. Any other questions before we leave this altogether? Because we're gonna go now to something else. So it's very important that you know how to calculate the nominal exchange rate. In other words, you don't need to calculate the nominal exchange rate will be given to you. I'm sorry, I'm talking about the nominal effective rate of protection. How to calculate the nominal effective rate of protection. You don't need to do that, as I said, because it will always be given to you. How to calculate the effective rate of protection. This is something that you need to work on. And
So, Professor,
Yeah.
can we say the effective rate of protection is actual rate of protection?
Yes, absolutely. That's what it is.
Okay, thank you.
That's the actual rate of protection. So don't let the 10% fool you, the nominal rate of protection, because that's not the effective rate. So the effective rate, as we have just shown, is 17% and not 10%. And then if the government happens to impose tariffs on components, now the effective rate of protection is not 10% for the laptop producers, but it's only 3%. Is this understood? Okay, let's go then to Let's go to our PowerPoints and let's continue from where we left off. Before we do that, I just want to show you here the formula used by your book. Now, some students may feel comfortable using this formula. That's fine. The formula given by your book is n minus AB over 1 minus A, where n is the nominal tariff rate on the final product. That's your n. B is the nominal rate on the imported inputs. A is the ratio of value of the imported input to the value of the finished product. So in our case, A is simply equal to 400 divided by 1,000. So you may want to write that down. So when you get the notes, you will be able to know exactly what that A is. That's what your A. It's simply 400 divided by $1,000, which is the ratio of the value of the imported input to the value of the finished product. So in our case, the denominator here, using our example, would be equal to 0.6 because it's 1 minus 0.4. A is 0.4, which is 400 divided by 1,000. N is 0.10. Why? Because N represents the nominal tariff rate on the final product, which is 10%. So that's 0.1. B is the nominal tariff rate on the imported input, which is 20%. Therefore, it's 0.2. Did everyone get this?
Yes.
So this is the formula that your book uses. And if you want to use that formula in the midterm exam, that's fine, because you're going to come up with the same result. And there will be a question or two on the effective rate of protection. So again, this is just a warning. Make sure you spend some time on understanding how to compute the effective rate of protection. In both cases, when there is only a tariff on the final product and when there is a tariff on the final product plus a tariff on the imported components. Make sure you know how to do both. And going back to the example that I have, which again, I will post for you, you should be able to do fine, because that example explains exactly how you go about finding the effective rate of protection in both cases. Okay, is this fine? Okay, now I'm really not going to go over the effective rate of protection here on your PowerPoints. I guess, I would just be repeating myself, basically. Will be a repetition of what I have already said. So it doesn't make sense wasting time on that. So, you could go on the PowerPoints at your own leisure, and as far as effective rate of protection is concerned. So from the effective rate, we're going to skip all the way. The tariff escalation, you don't have to worry about that. Outsourcing, you don't have to worry. Offshore assembly provision, tariff avoidance, tariff evasion, don't worry about that. All of that, you don't have to worry about it. Bonded warehouses, foreign trade zone, all of that you don't need. Now, this is what we need. This is the important thing. Which is finding what is the tariff effect on the overall economic welfare. In other words, once a government imposes a tariff on imports, whether it is the final product or the components, how will this tariff affect the economic livelihood of the country? Because we know that a tariff is simply a tax on imports. And we know that when we put a tax on imports, all what we're doing is we're simply raising the price of the imports. So when we raise the price of the imports, how do you think this will affect consumers? Buyers now will have to pay more for these goods. And not only for imported goods, they also have to pay more for US made goods. And I hope by now you all know why. Anyone can tell me why?
Because they can.
What do you mean because they can?
The tariff has raised the cost of imported goods. So now American-made goods can raise their price too because of the cost.
Very good. That's exactly what it is. So obviously, you know, when foreign imports increase, the price of foreign imported goods, then obviously, you know, domestic producers are going to say, okay, you know, prices now are not what they used to be. So we can go ahead and raise our prices too. So obviously the consumer will be affected. The other thing here, there will be a job loss. Where? In retail, that's pretty much connected with imported goods, and in transportation. All of these things will be affected. The transportation sector will not be able to do as well as they used to. Why? Because imports now are much more expensive. Imports are a lot less than they used to be. So the volume of imports is going to fall. Transportation also is going to fall. So anyone who owns ships or anything that has to do with transportation is going to feel the pinch. Also, now, as we raise tariffs on imports, other countries are going to be doing the same. In other words, there's going to be some retaliation. And what do you think this retaliation is going to do to our exports? Answer.
Reduce demand.
Exactly. Our exports will be reduced. We won't be able to sell as many exports as we were able to before. So do you think this is going to affect jobs or not?
Yes.
Absolutely. Will affect jobs. So you have to be very careful of what you are asking for. So that's why when we say we can't play this game of trade wars, because it's not going to benefit anyone and it's not going to help anyone. So when you have policymakers or politicians or presidents or whatever the case may be coming out to you and say, well, you know what, we're going to help you out. We're going to put tariffs on imported goods. We're going to help our domestic industry. Well, you may be able to get away with it in the short run, but guess what? In the long run, you're digging a deep hole. Not a good idea. And it's not an effective policy. Okay, so that's basically, some of the things that we see will happen on the demand side, as far as consumers are concerned, or export firms are concerned, etc. Now, what we want to do here is we want to construct a very simple model, a model that is made of demand and supply, that will help us answer all the questions that we have posed in as far as what are the effects of tariff on the economic livelihood of the country. First of all, we need to identify the players. Who are the players? There are three players: the government, because they are the ones who are imposing tariffs. They are the ones who will be collecting tariff revenues. Producers, domestic producers, those are the ones who will benefit from a tariff. And the reason is simply because we are giving them protection. And they will be able to raise their prices, and they will be able to increase production. Who is the third player? Consumers. How will the consumer be affected? Well, we have already talked about how the consumer is going to be affected. So I'm really not going to repeat myself there. Okay, so this is basically the model that we will be using, demand-supply model, to show exactly what the effect of the tariff will be. And here we're going to separate consumers and producers. We're really not going to focus too much on the government, because the government doesn't do anything apart from putting the tariff and receiving tariff revenues, okay? But the dynamics of the whole thing really focuses on consumers and producers. And for this reason, we're going to be using two concepts that are extremely important, that will help us define in terms of dollars what consumers will end up with and what producers will end up with in terms of dollars as a result of imposing the tariff. That's why consumer surplus and producer surplus are extremely important. Now, the analysis that we will be using, or the model that we will be using to do the analysis, is known as comparative static analysis. So let me write it down here. Comparative static analysis. Can everyone see this here?
Yeah.
Good. That's comparative static analysis. Now, what does comparative static analysis mean? It simply means that the simple model that we will be using is a static model, which means that it will hold everything else constant on both the demand side and the supply side. The only thing that it will allow to change is the price of the product because of an increase in tariffs. That's it. Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to investigate, the effect of a tariff on the general economic welfare of the country. So the only thing that we can allow to change is the price of the good because of a tariff increase. So in this case, we're looking at two equilibrium points. In other words, the initial equilibrium point that we will have without tariffs, and the next or the final equilibrium point that we will arrive to once we put tariffs on. So we have two equilibrium points that we need to compare, and that's why we say, or we call it, comparative static analysis. We're simply comparing two equilibrium points, one without tariff and the other one with tariffs. And this is known as comparative static analysis. It's not comparative dynamic analysis, because dynamism will mean that we have to allow for a lot of the other factors to change. We have to allow for shifts in demand and supply, and we are not going to allow for that. So we're going to be talking about a static analysis. Is this understood? Does everyone know what comparative static analysis mean? Okay. Now we go to consumer surplus. What is consumer surplus? In a nutshell, consumer surplus is simply the difference between the price that you actually pay for a product and the maximum price that you're willing to pay for it. That's what consumer surplus is. To give you an example, let's say you go to a mall one day and you see a pair of shoes that you really like. However, you don't see a price tag on it. And you say to yourself, well, I like this shoe so much that I'm willing to pay $100 for it. So this is the maximum amount you're willing to pay for that pair of shoe. Now, when you talk to the store attendant and the store attendant tells you, well, the price of that shoe is $80. So now what is your consumer surplus?
20.
$20, which is the difference between the maximum price that you are willing to pay and the actual market price. So that's consumer surplus. And consumer surplus is extremely important because it will measure for us in dollar terms how much a consumer is better off or how much a consumer is worse off. And it will give us dollar figures because ultimately that's what we need. Now we go to producer surplus. What is producer surplus? Again, in a nutshell, a producer surplus is simply the difference between the minimum price that a producer is willing to produce a product for and the actual market price. So let's say, for example, a producer would tell you, I am willing to produce this pair of shoes for, let's say, $80. And the market price of that shoes happens to be $100. So what would be the producer surplus here?
20.
$20. That's exactly what's meant by producer surplus. And when we measure producer surplus, we will know exactly how much better off producers are or how much worse off producers are in dollar terms. So all that we need is simply the demand. We need to estimate the demand for a particular product, and we need to estimate the supply for a particular product. And if we know what the world price is, and if we know what the tariff is, then we will be able to determine by how much consumers are better off or worse off, and by how much are producers better off or worse off in dollar terms. Is this understood by everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
But this is the reason why we need consumer surplus and producer surplus, because it really is going to help us tremendously in solving the questions that we posed. Consumer surplus is relegated to the demand curve. Producer surplus is relegated to the supply curve. Consumer surplus looks at the demand side of the market. Producer surplus looks at the supply side of the market. Okay, let's move forward now. Let's see what we have. Here we have the demand curve and the supply curves for gasoline. So right here, we have the normal downward sloping demand curve for gasoline, which we can estimate given certain data. We can actually estimate the demand curve. We can tell you exactly what this number is. And we can also tell you exactly what that number is. If I am given certain data on demand, I will be able to go to my computer and do a linear regression, crunch up the numbers, and find out exactly what the slope and what the intercepts of the demand curve is going to be. So this is not a big problem. We can do it. So now, once we know what the demand curve is, and once we know what the world price is, let's say the world price for gasoline, or the domestic price, if you want to call it that, that's fine. Doesn't make any difference. It's $2 per gallon. Then given the demand curve, I know exactly how much I want to buy. So if the price is $2, how many gallons would you buy?
4.
4 gallons, exactly. Now, once I know this information, I'll be able to determine what the consumer surplus is on 4 gallons purchased. How do I do that? And how do I find the consumer surplus? Well, the consumer surplus will be determined by the area of the triangle that lies above the market price and below the demand, which is the gray area right here. That's your consumer surplus. So once you know the market price, you simply have to take it all the way to your demand, determine what the quantities are, and from there you will be able to determine what the consumer surplus is, because you're going to look at the area of the triangle that lies above the market price and below the demand. Now, how do I find the area of that triangle? That's simply half base times height. What is the base of this triangle?
2.
4.
4. And what is the height?
2.
2. So what is the area of the triangle then?
4.
4.
4. Very good, which is half base times height. It's half 4 times 2. 4 times 2 is 8. Half of 8 is 4. So now I know what my consumer surplus is. It's $4 for consuming 4 gallons of gasoline, or it's $1 per gallon of gasoline. Is this understood? How to find consumer surplus? It's simply the area of the triangle that lies above the market price and below the demand. It's this gray area right there. Now, if the price happens to be $1 and I come right here and draw a line, then my consumer surplus will be the area of all of this triangle, right? Which is above the $1 and below the demand curve that correspond to that $1 right there. That would be the triangle. That will be my consumer surplus if the price happens to be $1. So you can see the consumer surplus will rise when the price falls. Consumer surplus will fall when the price increases. Now let's say the price goes to $3, which is right here. If that is the case, then now my consumer surplus is only the area of the triangle that lies above the $3, which is this one here, which is a lot smaller than this. Okay, so now we took care of consumer surplus and what it means and the importance of it in trying to measure whether consumers are better off or worse off. But before we finish that, let me just ask anyone if they know, what does this whole area signify? All of this. In other words, the gray area plus the square right here.
The total amount paid for gasoline.
What is it?
The total amount paid for gasoline.
No. The amount that you're paying is only this right here. Correct? This is how much you're paying for 4 gallons, $2, which is $8 right there. This is your total expenditure for gasoline. Anyone else? Okay, let me answer that then. This whole area right here signifies the total benefit that the consumer derives from consuming 4 gallons of gasoline when the price is $2 per gallon. So if I take this away from the total benefit, what do I get? If I take the cost out of the total benefit, what do I get? The net benefit, right? And that is consumer surplus. It's the net benefit. So you can define consumer surplus as simply total benefit minus total cost, which will give you net benefit. Okay, let's go to producer surplus. Same thing here. If the market price happens to be $2 per gallon, given the supply curve, producers at $2 will only produce 4 gallons. Now, how much would it cost for producers to produce 4 gallons? That again will be determined by the supply curve. So the first gallon will cost them a certain amount, the second gallon will cost another amount, the third, exact, up to you get to the 4th gallon. So all of this, the area under the supply, will give you the total variable cost of producing 4 gallons. But the producer is actually receiving this whole area. In other words, the producer is selling 4 gallons at $2 and is receiving 8. So the producer surplus then would be this gray area right here. which is defined by the area of the triangle that lies below the market price and above the supply curve. This would be the triangle that will define producer surplus for you. So producer surplus is measured by the area of the triangle that lies below the market price and above the supply curve. So there you have it. So now, once we are able to actually measure producer surplus and consumer surplus, our task becomes a lot easier of trying to determine how a tariff affects the general economic welfare. Okay, let's keep moving. Now we're going to start our model. And we have to make a few assumptions here. The first assumption that we want to make is that we are really looking at a small nation that will be importing goods and a small nation that will be posing a tariff on imports. And the reason we're doing this, later on we will change this and we will look at a large nation like the US, for example, how a tariff would affect the US economy. But the US economy is a large economy, so we will look at a large nation. But for now, let us start the easy way. Let us start with a small nation. And when we start with a small nation, we are actually assuming that all the imports of this small nation they make up a very small portion of the world market supply. In other words, how much can this nation consume? How much can it import of all the goods that are available in the world market? Very little, very small portion. Therefore, this nation has no influence over the market price. It can, for example, import 100 units, 500, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 max, for example, and it will not make a dent into the world price. Why? Because this nation is a small nation and all its demand for imports makes such a small portion of total world market supply that it will not affect the price. Therefore, we say that this nation is a price taker, which means that this nation will face a constant world price for the product that it imports, meaning the price elasticity of supply for this nation is infinite. Price elasticity of supply for this nation is infinite. The supply of goods, the supply of the imported good is infinite. Perfectly elastic. Meaning when you draw the world supply curve, you're gonna draw it as a straight line. Now, having said that, now we will look at the tariff effects. What will a tariff do? Well, this is what we believe it's going to do, but hopefully the model will help us determine that. So we don't need to memorize these things, simply because once we go to our model, to the graph will tell us everything that we need to know. But for now, just let's say that the tariff effects will be such that it will raise the home price of the imported good by the full amount of the tariff. It will result in higher domestic production and producer surplus. Also, it will lower domestic consumption and will decrease consumer surplus. So these are the conclusions of the tariff effects, but this is not all. This is not all that we want to find out. We want to find out a lot more than this. We want to find out if the tariff happens to be a good thing or a bad thing. We want to find out if the tariff is efficient or not. We want to find out what are the real effects of the tariff. Because by just saying that there is a decrease in consumer surplus, increase in producer surplus, really doesn't tell me much. Because suppose these two things offset each other, then what happened? Am I going to say that the tariff really hasn't done anything and it has not worsened the economic situation? No. I need to go deeper than this. So these things by themselves don't tell me much. They help, yes. And they're an extremely important help, yes. But the model will unveil other things that right now we cannot see. Okay, so let's move on. Let's go to the graph right here. I guess, well, we went overboard 2 minutes, so I'm gonna stop right there and we will explain this hopefully next time. Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so that's good. That means
Oh, when are you gonna grade the homework?
this weekend, hopefully. I have my hands full.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, I have 4 classes. So you're talking about what? You're talking about probably 180 things to grade plus the papers too. Remember, you know, I have to go through those papers and grade them. So it's a lot. But anyway, hopefully, you know, you should have those by the end of the week, the results.
Okay.
I'm going to spend the whole weekend going through them. So you should be able to get the results by the end of the week.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. So there are no questions. I'm surprised. So that means the lecture went very well. You pretty much understood everything I said.
Professor, are you
Yeah.
going to post the notes?
This one, yes, I will post them this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And
Bye.
again, for those of you who joined us late, well, I don't know. If you want the lectures to hear these lectures or to view the lectures, you can go on YouTube and you just put my name in, Nasser Duell. You can get everything else. And if you have any problems, let me know. Any other questions?
No, thank you, Professor.
Okay,
Have a good
thank
weekend.
you. All of you have a nice weekend now, and I'll see you next time.